As the Badge Turns podcast, we're back for another episode. This is Scott and Sheriff Stanek, as always. Sheriff, I think you just made it through TSA and were able to find a seat in a lounge somewhere, right?
One day we're going to have a conversation about TSA and the efficacy of what it is that they do.
I think that can be an interesting topic, yes.
Yeah.
Today, but for today, we're very honored to have Stephen Luce. He's currently the executive director for the Indiana Sheriff's Association. And I know you have a storied career, and we were talking offline beforehand. And I think it's just best that we hit record and just jump right into it. So, sir, if you could just kind of give us a little bit of background as far as what brought you to today. This might be like one of your crowning achievements to be on this show. I'm not sure. And if it is, we might have some conversation afterwards. But no, really honored to have you today. I know there's a lot of great work going on in your state, so we just kind of love to hear about it.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, Scott, and Sheriff Stanek, also from you. You know, we're good friends, been friends for a long time. But I think the thing that there's so much I could talk about, but I think it's the journey. I look back almost. I've been involved in the criminal justice system somehow the last 41 years. And whether it was a house parent for juveniles, a work release supervisor, a city police officer, a county sheriff, an elected sheriff, it covers, and then the director of the last 17 years. So I've seen a lot of changes in this environment. But, what kind of really drove me was coming out of high school, athletics were really something I loved, and I was a gifted athlete, but also a leader in the community as far as my age and going through high school. And, really with the parents I had really grounded values. And, there was 5 of us kids, mom and dad had to raise, and we were all a year apart. We really had to have those grounded values. And we moved around a lot too. And I think that's what helped with my, shaping me, was because every 2 or 3 years until I got to high school, we were moving because of my dad's job. He built power lines, and you go where the work is. And I went across the country everywhere. And, you kind of get to see the nation and communities, and everywhere is different. And I think that's what I loved about it was, it seemed like, I look back, it was like every 2 or 3 years I had a new challenge in my life growing up, and I learned stuff. So I think that's what drove me to being part of the criminal justice system. And then ultimately, my favorite part of my career was actually serving the people and the challenges in that environment of my community, and being that person that can help them find solutions, be the person that is trying to do right every day. Also being a person that is not reacting the wrong way, just because I have a deep belief in this profession as a police officer, and is to stay composed. But yet there are times when you have to go above and beyond, whether it's taking someone to jail or just doing something I didn't sign up for. And Rich can absolutely relate to this, because when I took the job, I did not sign up to be a counselor to people and that solution that nobody wants to deal with. But you know what? It came with the job. And those experiences what really drove me eventually to run for the office of sheriff, because I was a city police officer for 8 years prior to that. Went to the sheriff's office in Knox County in Vincennes, which is southwest Indiana, and decided about the age of 35, I think I'll run for sheriff, because I saw the difference between police entity, city police, and the sheriff's office after being a deputy for a few years. And it was such there was so much more to learn. And to be actually an elected person as being an appointed person, and I'm not downplaying a police chief, but being elected by the people is huge responsibility. And every day I learned from my first day on as a police officer, and I carried it over to be a sheriff. If there's 40,000 people in my county, I have 40,000 bosses. And that's literally how I went out to work every day. So my path was just grew. And I've always been one. I know when I got elected in 2002, I know I was in my second day in new sheriff school. And I'm like, man, this would be an awesome job to have one day as a director of the ISA. So I kind of set myself up for a path to follow. And if the opportunity was there, I was going to jump on it, knowing, and Rich knows this, our state is one of 3 states where the sheriffs are term limited. We can do 2 terms and then we have to sit out. at least 4 years. So my time to be a sheriff was short. And I knew at the end I couldn't go back being a deputy because I had at that time in my career 3 kids to put through college, and I could not do it on a deputy salary. So I had to try and build my resume. And I went in and applied for this ISA executive director's job, knowing the organization. And I was president when I was a sheriff in 2007. I was picked by my peers. And since 2009, I've been the executive director of the Indiana Sheriff's Association. And I think why I really love this job is I get to stay connected to the profession. And I think that's very important. And as Rich knows, because many officers, when they retire, because they cannot stay connected, they suffer. And that's what we want to do. We want them to be able to stay connected and live that life as a grandfather, a father, a husband, and do the things they weren't able to do. So, there's a lot that I've seen over the years, good and bad. But I feel like God puts people in places. And as long as I'm here, I'm going to try to do the best I can, not only for my family, but my community and the state and the National Sheriff's Association and the sheriffs that are serving.
Scott, on my way over, I was thinking about our guest today because I've known Steve for a number of years, both he and his wife and his daughter, and the work that he's done over the years. But I was thinking about all the guests we've had. They've all had 40 plus years of law enforcement experience. You just can't replace that. I mean, you think about that. Steve here has 41 years of dedicated public service, and nobody knows it better than him. He, unfortunately, was term limited out. So he only got to serve 8 years in that top position, but he bounced right back. He knew what he wanted to do, and he became the executive director of ISA, which, as you and I know, Scott, is a leader across this country in terms of state organizations helping sheriffs become good sheriffs to their communities. And I can't stress that enough. Just those years of experience, the way these men and women bounce around, come right back. Once a leader, always a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is. And let me just add to that, because and I was saying this earlier before you joined, Rich. That's like, it's hard for me to relate, to you gentlemen, because I didn't walk the same path, but I've gained a much deeper appreciation and understanding just in these conversations, right? And then in my role with Prime, being able to, be at conferences, like I'm in Wisconsin, today and tomorrow. So I get to be around it. I get to hear the stories. I get to have that. But certainly, that line of dedication, and having that mindset, Steve, to look at and say, okay, I know what I want to do. Like you said, 2 days in, I want to be able to do that next role. Some people can't figure out what they're going to have for lunch, and lunch was 30 minutes ago. So obviously there's a lot of thought process that goes into it. But no, I would be remiss in not mentioning that, just the outward appreciation, and then understanding that this isn't a desk job. You're not doing the same thing every day. You don't know what's going to happen during that day. So let's hit on that if we can a little bit. Going into that role when you became sheriff, and then even as it translates into being the executive director, knowing that there was basically a time clock on it. So I could spend that much time, but then I need to go somewhere else. What stands out as kind of and I get it. You strike me as someone that's not going to say, well, these were my achievements, but more so for the organization, for the office. So what stands out from a sheriff, and then in the executive director? And I'm sure you still have a list on the board. I'm picturing these are more things that we need to go through. So let's kind of walk through kind of what areas of focus you've had and where you still want to go.
I mean, the thought process that I bring to as an executive director, the biggest learning curve I had to do was take off my sheriff hat and learn how to be a non-for-profit director, raising money. I was used to, for years, money being provided through a budget. So that was different for me. And the one thing I knew I could do is, and what I loved about being the sheriff or being a police officer, is every day can be different. And that is what fuels me. So when I go into the role as executive director, when I did the transition, I still had that option. Because I can tell you, I'm not a person who's going to come in here and do the same thing every day. I have to be productive. And I want to be able to create an environment that is going to benefit. It's not about me. It's about my staff. It's about the people I work for and the community ultimately. So, I just take a look at this every day. And literally, and Rich knows this, I'm I'm very health conscious on my wellness physically and stuff like that. And I believe that's where my day starts in the morning. And if you're not healthy physically, how are you going to be healthy in other ways to help people? So it's important. And I try and stress to the officers today how important that is, because ultimately, I said it earlier, when you retire, I can tell you a couple things. You're going to have a lot of new friends, our friends over the years. You're going to have a closet full of uniforms, and you're going to get a pension check. So it's up to you to decide that path when you retire. So the great thing about it is you've got all these skills that you've learned as a police officer, a sheriff's deputy, a sheriff, leadership. Now apply it as a civilian. That's what I do. I take this. I'm not going to reteach myself all this stuff, but I can improve myself. And that's why I'm big on emotional intelligence, because your IQ stops growing at a certain point. You can only get so smart, but your emotional intelligence can always grow even later in life. But you have to be able to exercise that. And that is the approach I pretty much take every day in doing a coaching model or mentorship to my 92 sheriffs, to anybody in the community. When I go work out in the morning, I get asked a lot of questions, and it's just coaching. And I think that has a really good purpose today in a spot. And I'd like to see it done more between our leadership and the ground level deputies or police officers, because I think they really need it every day because they're struggling at times.
Absolutely. Are there certain elements that you see, and let's stay on coaching for a little bit, because obviously that's passionate, be it in, and I think it's the right mindset to have too, be it in, so many, as I'm in Green Bay and one of the, arguably one of the greatest coaches of all time, right? In that, it's, I won't say too many times, but it's easily associated just with sports. But as a manager of people, right, that you essentially are that. You're managing players on a field, you're managing officers within the confines of a station, what have you. So in that, when you approach that, are there certain individuals that look at it kind of sideways and don't understand the coaching approach and the mechanisms, or do you see, and I guess there's probably a split between it, but in that, do you see more gravitate towards it, understand that I might have been the stud football player when I was 16 and 17, but now I'm a deputy at 28, and I can still be inspired, and I can still approach it as a competition or as a group of individuals that form a team? So what have you seen, Steve?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I mean, if you're going to be in the role of a police officer or somewhere where you're going to serve the community, you probably have that inside of you. It's just sometimes we just have to tap into it, and you have to maybe go back and relearn. I'm a big person with visualization. When I was a police officer and still working the road, when I went to calls and I knew where I was going through scenarios in my head, because ultimately, sheriff knows this, if I have to use use of force, my decision-making skills have got to be quick and sharp. Ultimately, I do that because I know I'm going to make the right decision. And so to me, it's all in us. It's just tapping into it. And how are you going to make that happen? So that's why I use coaching a lot and mentorship, because it's going to help me grow, continue to grow. And I think what it brings, and this is something we miss in a lot of places in our communities, we're trying to fill that gap or that void of trust. And Rich knows this, law enforcement, to really get deep and down into our emotions, I've got to have a trusted person in a place where I can talk to them. And that's what I try and provide. And it may take 2 or 3 times, but you know what? Don't quit. And that's kind of, my philosophy every day. And I try and call somebody every day. I did today. I called an executive director who's brand new, and I could tell he's drinking from a fire hose because I was with him 2 days ago. And I picked up the phone to call him and say, hey, whatever you need, I'm here, and that's what people need. Sometimes you cannot let people suffer in silence. That's the worst thing. So go above and beyond and outside. And, ultimately at the end of the day, you're just making a better path for yourself.
No, absolutely.
Scott, Steve, talk about these term limits, because again, you're the first time out of the last 9 or 10 that we've had somebody on the show here that have term limits, and they have their pros and cons. Citizens say, oh, we love term limits, we don't want you to serve forever, but when you come from a professional position like this, it works against you as well. It works against the community. Talk about that for a minute, your experiences.
Yeah, and I've looked back, Rich, over the years, and if I had to say, one of the things that in Indiana, and we have 92 counties, one reason why we probably don't have consistency in the counties is because we are limited in terms. Because a new sheriff can come in for 8 years, put in a new jail management system, a new sheriff comes in after him and says, I don't like that one, I'm going to another one. What you're finding out is that there's just no standardization on certain processes. And I think the term limits have made it hard on Indiana for that reason. But what I have found, and this is what I use with my sheriffs, is, we hit the ground running and we leave the ground running. And Sheriff Stanek knows that we're a very cohesive organization. We are probably a little more aggressive in recognizing trends or doing things compared to some states, not all. But I can tell you that we're always thinking of what's around the corner. So term limits, to me, I finally have adopted that. I believe I'd love to be sheriff for, 5 or 6 terms. But you know what? Since I've been doing this so long, I've adopted that blueprint of, we have it right. And it works for Indiana because the sheriffs are learning. I can tell every 4 years when the sheriffs are exiting after 8 years, some of them will want to come back. But I only feel like that's because they've done such a good job. They've been working, they're very cohesive, and they're trying to fulfill that promise. And that's one of the things I tell the sheriffs is when you leave, about a year before, start looking back and what did you promise when you were going to get elected? And if you feel like you did what you said you did to the people, your transition to civilian life or the next job, you should be fine. That's what I did. I went back and checked all the boxes. And I only actually did 6 of my 8 years. I had 2 years left, but I felt like when I was done, I went back and I'm like, no, I did this. I was able to complete what I wanted to do. And I was okay with leaving. So term limits does have the advantages, but it also has disadvantages because I think it causes counties as a state, not only sheriff's office, but it's hard to continually develop policies and procedures that continually can say solid. I mean, that's your risk management tool. And sometimes, they never get complete because of the term limits.
No, absolutely. I know one of the other topics I wanted to bring up today is, and I've heard you talk about this over the last couple of years at the National Sheriff's Association and other conferences around the use of technology and the use of essentially advertising. And I think it's, and I'll let you tell it, of course. I've heard enough of it, so I'll let you speak to it as far as it relates to billboards and radio, because it really is still unique. So let's kind of walk through one. Where did that come from? And again, how can it grab a little bit more attention somewhere else and the benefit just as far as exposure and increasing the membership?
Yeah. Well, and all the state sheriff associations out there they have some form of fundraising. They're either 501c3, C4, C6, but they have to raise funds. And you just cannot rely on memberships every year, whether it's business members, citizen membership, family memberships. You have to be able to create other non-dues revenue projects. And that's that's where I went I think this is a 4th campaign, and you and I talked before we went live, but I'm using iHeartRadio and I'm matching that campaign on radio with billboards. We just did one with our Indiana Sheriff's license plate through our BMV. It's a specialty plate program. We do very well on that program. We don't market it and never have, but when I look at the numbers every year and we get 25 of the $40 on a specialty plate that goes back to ISA, and we put that towards training, education. We give away $750 scholarships a year to Hoosier families. And we do 2 North and South leadership camps for kids annually. So I can tell you the money we're bringing in is going to those programs. And I'm a big believer, if we have X amount of dollars, we're going to spend that top level because that's what the money is for. And that's why people are worried that they have a plate. So the campaigns I've been running has been very, it's all about messaging. Is how am I getting the message of the ISA and the Office of Sheriff out to the Hoosiers in Indiana? And when you look at our highway system, which I have done, we have about 3 or 4 major highways that run north, south, east, and west. And the way our state is positioned, in Indianapolis in the center, I feel like compared to a lot of states, we have like perfect storm to run a billboard, iHeartRadio campaign, because if they're going to drive from one end of the state to the other, they're going to spend probably a third of their trip listening to the radio and seeing billboards through middle Indiana. And I can tell you, our online website, our Google Analytics have shown that these campaigns have increased all the way up to 500 to 600% online new people coming online. Our online giving has been up. So I have presented this to the Committee of State Sheriff Associations several times. I'm really, and Rich has been there, I've really encouraged them, like, come on, guys, you've got to do this. You just can't sit back there and do nothing. Because I tell them all the time, I can tell you right now, ISA and my sheriffs, we are not in the business of doing nothing. And that's what I tell them. So this has been very successful for us. We're just getting ready to kick off probably late fall, early winter campaign. And it's going to be about connection to the community. And it's going to be called and focus on get real. And I'd be happy to share it to you when it goes out. We do a male, female 30-second voiceover about the ISA and joining, only because we also want to speak to men and women. We want to be very diverse in our messaging. We tailor to those type of listeners. And we use a lot of analytics through the company I partner with on how many views are at a certain billboard per week, per month. And I can tell you, it's millions and millions that people are seeing, and it's millions and millions of people are listening and hearing our radio ads throughout a 2 or 3 month periods. And it's also another way to diversify our fundraising. You just can't mail stuff all the time. You have to do it other ways. But if you're fundraising, I can tell you, if your fundraising is diverse enough, you have a great model, which I believe we finally, a few years ago, has perfected. We probably mail to our members at least every 45 days, either a newsletter or a special appeal. That's how we raise our money. And it's all done for them through a soft ask. They can write the check, credit card, put it in the paid envelope and send it off. And I tell you, that is the key. How can I make it simple for those people who want to give? Because nobody wants to run around for 2 days to find a stamp and then they forget to mail a donate. I've learned a lot in this position. And again, that's what I try to do with a lot of the new executive directors is teach and help in any way I can help with their fundraising. I probably give out too many secrets, my wife tells me, but in the end, it's about helping people. With the radio campaign and iHeartRadio, again, we're on our 4th cycle, and I really like to see more and more from other states, because I think they're missing an opportunity, because eventually all your mailing is going to go to digital and some other form. People are not going to want to read stuff probably in 15, 20 years. It's slowly going to go away. And the average person at a sheriff's association that's a donor is probably over 60 years old. They're on a limited income. So how can I make it easy for them? And that's what we do.
Absolutely.
I've seen, Scott, I've seen both the billboards. I've heard it on iHeart. I've listened to, for a while, Steve was doing a podcast. I'm not sure if you're still doing it or not. But I was thinking, as you were talking a little bit earlier about, you've been in this position at least 8 years, and that means that every sheriff in the state of Indiana has turned over. I'm wondering, what is that most frequent question or the first phone call you got to make to a sheriff in one of those counties when something happens and they say, Mr. Executive Director, what do I do now? Because we all have that problem. And
Yeah.
What do you tell them? What do they ask you?
Probably the first question is when they take the office is they don't realize, honestly, even if they've been a career deputy, until you get to the office of sheriff, the one thing you're responsible for is the jail. And that is your highest liability. And if you're not focusing on the jail, Rich knows it, 70% of the litigations that come through counties are because of jail. And I say it this way because I want to impact people when I talk to them about a jail. I tell them, anytime you warehouse humans, that's a risk. So it is your job as a sheriff to make sure constitutionally that you are providing your offenders with what you're supposed to be doing. To me, the jail is the calls about the wrongful deaths, or I had an inmate die in my jail. And then the other one is probably an officer shooting. Those are the 2 biggest phone calls I get. And, what I try and do is I try and talk them through it, give them, and Rich knows this too. I've made a lifetime, and I've been here 17 years. instead of 8 years, Rich. But I can tell you, when I was sheriff, I have done all I can to be that guy who can network and get that one person where a sheriff can make one phone call, not be put on hold. And it's very important to him or her is to make one phone call to the person that can help them through a situation. So that's what I try and do, offer up any resources or advice I can, but it's the officer shooting, line of duty death, and that death in the jail. Those are the hard ones. And that's where I try and really connect with the sheriff and make sure that they understand you just don't have to rush yourself through this. Pace yourself, do the right things, talk to your attorney, talk to the right people. And you know what? You don't have to say stuff right away, but make sure you have a good media team or a person or a resource. And we do provide that through our association. If the sheriff cannot afford to have a good PIO or be in a rural county, they just don't have those resources. We do have a contract with a media company that can have those private phone calls and help them through and providing that good press release to the people in their community.
No, that's great. I know one of the topics, and again, we were having a little bit of a conversation before we started, so I'll kind of tee this one up because we were going back on this for a little bit. Being responsible for the jail, right? So as you come in as a sheriff, there's this whole list of items which, from a deputy to the sheriff, a lot of it's, I'm sure, brand new, right? Certainly as far as having to be responsible for it. So, when we talk about, expenses, when we talk about having to manage the budget, your jail, your in-house medical, let alone your offsite medical, certainly can be all consuming. And it's one of those things where you might have an earmark of dollars, but any number of things could happen. There could be pre-existing conditions. So I guess, Steve, the experience in that is, what has been your interaction so far with sheriffs about, some do in-house medical and have great programs, others are still trying to figure it out.
Yeah. And that's the probably the coaching in me where it comes in with the newer sheriffs and having them understand if you have to pick and choose where you're going to spend most of your time, it better be inside the jail. That's where you have to be, because the jail will not run itself. The road will. Okay. So, focusing on the jail, trying to teach them about medical and budgets. We have 92 counties and probably 70% of them are small, medium counties. So they don't have those funds or revenue when they do a medical contract to have probably a medical doctor there every day. It's not required in Indiana to have one physically there, but they have to be available and accessible to do things. So many of them go to a contract where it may be a nurse practitioner that's in there. Maybe they're there every day. Maybe they can only afford in their contract 3 days a week. But the medical thing should always be a high priority. Our sheriffs do communicate with our commissioners, who are the executive body, because they sign contracts, but yet they allow the sheriff here in Indiana. We have the leverage, because we're a constitutional office, to sign all contracts that are related to contractual services to our office. But yet we do bring the commissioners in to share to make sure the county attorney can review any legal language and things like that, but they cannot slow the process down because maybe there's a difference in being an R or a D in the neighborhood there. Don't play politics with it. So inmate medical care is very important. It should be one of the top 3 things when you're running a jail, because you have to take care of people. And Rich knows this too. I mean, compared to when I was sheriff, I just saw how, in the early 2000s, we dealt with the methamphetamine, the labs, all that stuff. And I really saw how the population of people became more chronic. More and more. They just didn't have one sickness. They had multiple sicknesses and addictions. And so they had more people who had co-occurring disorders. So not only did you have to help them with their addictions, but your behavioral mental health was also big. So, you have a big responsibility in your medical contract, and you got to make sure that, to me, there's only one standard of care. There's not 2, 3, or 4 different kinds. There's one, and that is your job as a sheriff to provide that. And if you can't, you need to get somebody in there who can provide that. So medical care, I love talking about, because people, I don't think, understand how much of that consumes the sheriff's budget. But you have to provide that. We are trying to work with our national organization, not only them, but the National Association of Counties, and trying to get a little bit of relief in these waivers across the United States where, benefits don't stop, because it's really, the sheriff and the county takes a big hit when those benefits stop because they're incarcerated, even for a short time. So, there needs to be a streamlined process. And, we are trying to work through the ISA with our sheriffs, with our state partners, but there's got to be a handoff between the federal and state partners to make this thing work.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, I'll say this, we certainly will spend some time after this podcast talking more about that line of service that we could extend to you and all of your counties, Stephen. And like we said, all we want to do is be in the conversation, look at the options that are available. If something works, that's fantastic. If there's a need, even if it's a one-off bill, could be that air ambulance bill that comes out of, well, when it's coming, but certainly those things in many instances are not planned. That's what, I want to be able to help you and the rest of your membership do. So yeah, definitely more to come on that topic.
And I think what makes us unique, the Indiana Sheriff's Association, over the years, and when we talk to legislators or groups or people or other state law enforcement associations, you'll find out that the Sheriff's Association, no matter what your opinion is or what this topic is, we're willing to have the conversation. We may not agree with you, but you know what? Just having the conversation is where you build that relationship. And whether you agree or not, I can tell you many are able to see the rewards because they don't have the conversation. And you should be open to that.
Absolutely. I agree completely. Sheriff Rich, any other topics you want to bring up? I know we're probably getting close, so we'll wrap up this episode. But before we do, any last comments or thoughts?
I just want to say thank you to Steve for the leadership he's provided across this country to America's sheriffs. It is not an easy job. The men and women who go out there and do this every day, whether you're a deputy, correctional officer, civilian employee, or the sheriff, him or herself. And we know a lot of them. It is not an easy task. And so you have somebody like Steve with 40 plus years of experience. He likes to mentor people every time I hear him speak, and it's a lot. And he talks about helping folks see beyond what they think they can do and how to reach that next level. And he's right. Chapter 2 for many of us, we all say, oh, we're never going to retire. We're young. We got lots of time to go. Well, that day rolls around. My only advice I give people when they retire is don't go to the doctor for the first 6 months because you're not going to like it. I can get rid of your bunion. I can, take care of that toe fungus. And next thing you know, 3 years have gone by and you're still having a new knee and a new hip and enjoy your retirement while you can. There's plenty of time to take care of those other things. So thank you, Steve, for what you do.
Yeah, and you're right about all those body part replacements because I've gone through them too. You got to take time for yourself, and I think that's if I had an ending message with today's podcast is I have a son. He's a police officer, been a police officer with Indiana University for 20 years, and he's the major there. He's the academy director at IU. They run the only higher ed academy across this nation, and he and I get to talk all the time because we have about 4 or 5 generations of police officers working together. So him working with the younger ones and me on this end, it's the greatest thing to have because he and I can talk and compare about how can we bring these people together, get them on the same plane, because sometimes it's not easy with the older guy and the younger guy. And they're not willing as an older person to understand the younger, they're going to ask more questions. So, I've got a great resource myself, and I got a couple of nephews who are police officers. It runs deep in our blood. And, all I can tell people is every day get up, and just be positive, try and do your best every day, but ultimately, stay the course. And, I've been able to do that because I've been married 41 years. And my wife, Ann, has many times showed me the path that I'm missing. So, and I'd say the biggest thing that has helped me in my years here is just having a different perspective with other people when I'm having conversation. Understand what they might have been through and put yourself in their place, because it makes a difference in how you talk to people, tone your conversation down. You want to make sure that they know you're interested in what they have to say. So I appreciate the time today, and it's always good to see you guys.
Absolutely. Again, we appreciate you. Thank you, Steve. And we'll have some follow-up conversations, and maybe soon in a couple of months, we'll have you back back on so you could remind everybody of your fifth and sixth advertising program with billboards and what you're doing with license plates to say you guys are missing out, right? You know, you got to pick up and do something, have action. What was the end on this? Remind me again, what was the saying you were having in the next advertising program?
It's about get real.
Get real. Yeah. So get real.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, and I'd like to say I can't go outside of Indiana, but I always tell the other directors coming to a neighborhood near you. So look out.
Absolutely.
And Steve, you like this. I always tell Scott, you know, my mantra for this podcast is protecting the office of sheriff one podcast at a time.
Yeah.
And so thanks very much for being our guest today.
I appreciate it. I'm honored and looking forward to future conversation.
Absolutely. Very good. Well, thanks. We'll talk soon.
All right. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Hi, I'm Scott with Prime Health Services and Prime Corrections. And when I'm not hosting with Sheriff Stanek, I wanted to take a few moments and talk about our offsite inmate medical cost containment solution. So if you're running a jail and you have to take an inmate offsite for medical treatment of any type, have you ever paid full bill charges for that expense? Hopefully not. But if you have, let Prime help you out. So what we do every day, we receive many bills. I'll give you one example of a bill we just processed this week. This was for a county in Florida. This was for an air ambulance treatment. The total bill, $53,256. Through our scrubbing process and negotiations, we were able to reduce that bill down to $8,447.26. That is, that's a savings of 84%. So if you are looking to save on your offsite inmate medical expense, contact Prime. You can reach us via a link below. You can also send an email directly to corrections@primehealthservices.com. That's corrections@primehealthservices.com. Let Prime show you and let Prime help you save money. Thanks and have a great day.